Hello and welcome. This is Jessica Lane, and this is my final project for American Studies 135 Peoples and Cultures of the Americas. In this final project, I will specifically be discussing border control and borderlands. First, I would like to give a quick background or intro on my project and on this class. I found this class to be very insightful on a variety of topics as it relates to Latin American history and formation as a people. I learned about different cultural aspects, such as art, film, music, and how these all relate to issues today as it pertains to race, gender, and sexuality, just to name a few. I was able to see a wide variety of communities and how they interact with one another. Most importantly, I was able to expand my worldview and my historical knowledge of Latin American peoples as well as general American studies. With all that said, however, I would like to focus on the specific topics of border control and this borderlands. So, I had learned about border control and US Border Patrol previously in the context of illegal immigration and the DACA program. So, the DACA program, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, is immigration policy that allows some individuals with unlawful presence in the United States after being brought to the country as children, but also denies presence in the United States for people such as these children's parents. It always seemed like a great point of discussion and conflict within news outlets and just discussion in general, and it had always intrigued me to learn more about. I had so many questions. Why are these people not allowed to enter the United States? Why are some of their children allowed to enter and parents are not? How do we allow for more families to stay together and try to find a better life within the United States? Our country, the United States, is one born from immigrants. Without immigrants, the United States as we know it today would cease to exist. For this reason, I couldn't fathom why we were not as accepting of other immigrants making their way here to find better jobs and better quality of life. And here down below, I have just included some media, some pictures of the US Mexico border wall. I think this is a very powerful image. You have the American flag behind the wall and the Border Patrol officer, and those just looking past the wall into the wall, maybe searching for a better life, for better jobs for their families, etc. I also have included pictures of DACA protesters, defend DACA, defend dreamers, and in the back, no human being is illegal. And this poster I thought was specifically very interesting. No one is illegal on stolen land. And I think that that sums up the conflict perfectly, how the United States is very much being hypocritical and contradicting in our way of treating immigrants. So, this brings me to my thesis. Borders as a concept divide peoples and provide more harm than good, which is why we need to reform how we deal with border control and assume more humane policies for people coming into the United States. And that's what I'm going to be arguing throughout the text that I'm going to show you today. Here I included more media, more photos, one of the US Mexico border wall again, because that's what I'm mainly focusing on. And I thought it was very interesting to show how this is the divide between two peoples, two countries, and how as it goes out to sea, it simply disappears. I thought that was very interesting, as if it's not trying too hard to divide the two peoples, or how far can this divide really extend. I also included another picture of an immigrant protest, full rights for all immigrants, and how important this is to people that we do treat immigrants with respect and give them the rights that they deserve as people, as human beings. So, I would like to go into how this specifically relates to this course, Peoples and Cultures of the Americas. So, what really stood out to me during this course were the following texts: the Borderlands Keyword Essay, Borderlands La Frontera, and Our America, or Nuestra America. All of these readings taught me more about what is wrong with the current system we have in place at our borders, namely the US Mexico border, and why it is so crucial that we try to change how we deal with immigrants, how we treat immigrants. At its core, the concept of borders and border control go against American values of freedom and equality and basic human rights. Over the course of this class, I learned more about the people behind the idea and this very way subject or concept of border control and how this really affects people, the humane aspect. This made me question and doubt borders and their functions even more. So, what is the function of borders? I have here another tweet from the New York Times where Mexican police fire tear gas at migrants who approach a train crossing along the US border in Tijuana. And it just is kind of disturbing images of how immigrants are treated at the borders for simply wanting a better life. As you can see, this is a mother with her children. People just want better lives for their families, and there needs to be something done about how we treat them and how we view them in a humane way because they are people. So, the first text I would like to go into is Borderlands, a keyword essay by Nicole Guidotti Hernandez. So, Nicole Guidotti Hernandez first establishes borders as, and I quote, fictions of material consequence created by empires and fortified with the invention of the modern nation state. So, in other words, borders are fictitious. By writing this, she means borders are made by men and can be unmade by men. They present nothing but this consequence that she speaks of, and they block human interaction. The concept of borderlands itself is, and I quote, the relationship between the centers and margins of power, which are in dialectic tension for Latino populations. Latino populations are simply subjected to this power and have no say in the forced separations that occur between themselves, between their families, etc. One quote that particularly stood out to me about power and really intrigued me was the abstract concept of border becomes materialized through policing, inclusion, exile, and permitted passage, setting the stage for how the creation of a border morphs into a borderlands imaginary. This is by Hernandez. So a border becomes a borderland, or how I understand it, when power is exercised on one side and people are punished on the other. So instead of trying to help people to be with their families or welcome people from marginalized communities find solace in the seemingly free land of the United States, these borderlands just harm and separate families and entire races of people. Furthermore, borderlands theories of intimacy and violence are a means of reckoning with the use of space to naturalize violent racial, gender, sexual, and class ideologies, as written by Guidotti Hernandez. So, as depicted in her writing, the concept of borders and borderlands present a real issue and a sort of border that not only physically divides people, but also promotes this violence and inhumane actions that are inflicted every day on innocent people searching for better lives. This still leaves the concern of what is to be done with this. This presents the problem, but how do we change this? What can be done about this? Can the Borderlands hold anything other than a negative connotation? So to look more at the humane aspect or how people themselves are actually being treated, I'd like to focus on Gloria Anzaldua's writing. So this is Borderlands La Frontera by Gloria Anzaldúa. And here I just have a media picture of Anzaldúa and her book Borderlands La Frontera. So, when examining Anzaldúa's Borderlands, I got insight into a more human aspect of borders and how they actually affect the people that live there. Anzaldúa herself lived on the Texas Mexico border, and she writes of it, and I quote, it's not a comfortable territory to live in, this place of contradictions. Hatred, anger, and exploitation are the prominent features of this landscape, end quote. There are no happy emotions that are used in her description of the border. It becomes this place of confusion and separation for people that live there, which cannot be a good environment. One of my favorite quotes from Anzaldua's text is as follows: "The U.S.-Mexican border es una herida abierta, where the third world grates against the first and bleeds. And before a scab forms, it hemorrhages again, the lifeblood of two worlds merging to form a third country, a border culture. Borders are set up to define the places that are safe and unsafe, to distinguish us from them." End quote. Comparing a border to an open wound suggests that there is pain and struggle living there. The dividing lines between the rich and poor, first and third world countries are so close, yet so firm, strong, and divisive. There simply is nothing inviting about a border or a borderland, and there is no effort to integrate both sides and send aid to those in need. There is only pain and bleeding and suffering, as described by Ansaldúa. So this again presents another problem and kind of this inhumane treatment. So, with that said, I would like to focus on a kind of different take on borders and borderlands by Jose Marti. So, the last text is Our America or Nuestra America by Jose Marti. In his text, Marti promotes Latin American nationalism and how Latin American countries are not weak and thus should be standing against tyranny, against oppression. He writes against oppression as well, and I quote, "A common cause had to be made with the oppressed to consolidate the system opposed to the interests and customs of the rule of the oppressors." End quote. In other words, Latin American peoples must come together as one to avoid this tyranny and a feeling of inferiority inflicted upon them by countries such as the United States and big governments. This relates to my thesis and claim of the United States causing harm at our borders, the US-Mexico borders, that is, as well as those that belong to other Latin American countries. Where Marti differs from the aforementioned text is he calls to action these marginalized communities to come together and fight against a common cause and oppressor because they are strong together. This could be a possible solution to harm that stems from borderlands, protesting and fighting back against the oppressors. Marti addresses superiority complexes stemming from the United States as well. And I quote, "The strong country would declare idle and inferior. To think is to serve, nor must be assumed, though a provincial antipathy, some ingenious and fatal malice on the part of the blonde-haired people of the continent, just because they do not speak our language, or see a house the way we see it, or because they are not beseeming to us in their political blights, ours being different than theirs." Marti cites the differences between the United States and Latin American countries and assures Latin American communities that they are not inferior just because they have varying ways of life. This needs to be applied as it relates to policing borders and inflicting violence on the innocent as well. We need to remember that we are all people with differences, and creating more divides and more borders will not change that. And the people that are oppressed need to stand together, work together as one. And I also have this media included of Jose Marti and also of South America and all of these people holding hands and sticking together to fight for their rights and for equal and just protection. So this brings me to my conclusion. Borders and borderlands can be harmful and confusing places for inhabitants and places certain countries use to exercise and abuse power, something which is acknowledged by all of these scholars or authors that I have included in my project. It is important that we consider the violent and divisive nature of these places and how it impacts the real people that live there or that have to deal with this on a daily basis. My project is concerned with the issues associated with borders today and how we can implement changes in order to promote inclusivity of races and peoples. I am still left with the questions of how and if we can make this possible. How can we close the herida abierta that is left by these borderlands? That is still an ongoing topic of discussion. So that concludes my presentation, and thank you for listening.